Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're joined by Eagle Song Gardner, who joins us back on the program today. If you remember last time, we were talking about herbs and how we can incorporate those into our lives. Well, today we're going to look at the wise woman's way as we talk with Eagle Song about this very path when it comes to bringing herbs into our lives. She is located in Monroe, Washington, and also the organizer of the annual Pacific Women's Herbal Gathering, which has been going on for many years, about 2 decades, as I understand. And she's joining us here on the program. I'd like to welcome Eagle Song Gardner to the program. Eagle Song, thank you for being back.
Hey, Daniel, it's great to be here. Thank you.
Now, a lot of times when people think of herbs, they think of supplementation. It's sort of like a lot of things. I kind of want to say this lightly, but in America where we tend to be separated rather than, at one with them. Tell them about this traditional way of healing when it comes to the wise woman. What does that mean exactly?
Oh, well, that's a great question, mostly because it isn't really very exact. The tradition is universal. All cultures practice this way of healing. It is an invisible way of healing because people don't really see what keeps life going as much as they see a lot of the other things around us. And so women have practiced it through time by paying attention to the people that they're feeding and tending and caring for, and really being the primary caregivers in all cultures. So in the Western way of looking at the world, we've reduced medicine to something that's separate from life. And in the wise woman tradition, what I've learned over time, and especially from plants, is how to take one herb on a regular basis, a daily or, I've used a lot of the same herbs for over 30, 35 years. And so really weaving the plants into my life on a daily basis, which brings strengthening and vitality, is probably the underpinning of the wise woman tradition. And it's not to say that we can't use other ways of looking or other approaches. In fact, the wise woman tradition honors all approaches.
Now, it's interesting because I remember there was a book I was reading a little bit about the wise woman approach, and what the author was talking about was, you can go ahead and you can learn how these things work, whether it's a particular herb, and, that's one approach. Or you can go a little bit deeper than that, but ultimately the wise woman approach, according to the author, was a way of actually being in communication with not only what, let's say the plant, just to keep it general here, is, but what its spirit is, what its purpose is here. And to me, when you have a connection that deep, I think you're going well beyond the kind of expectations as well as, I guess, the experience beyond what most people would actually have when it comes to something like, the use or incorporating or bringing herbs to life within your own life.
Yeah, bringing herbs to life, I guess, and having that really deep interaction with a plant. What I started to realize is plants have so much more, there's so much more to learn about the plant, which actually helped me to learn about myself and the world I live in. So I think of it as an anthropological viewpoint, that I'm really curious about culture, and I came to the tradition because I'm a rather stubborn and sovereign woman, and I like to do things my own way. And the plants always allowed for that. And so there was a lot of, and they became allies for me, allies that didn't create dependence, but that I could always turn to them and rely on them to support me when I was growing and changing. So in a sense, the plants took me away from looking toward what I don't want in my life, and they brought me kind of softly and almost without noticing to look at what I do want in my life. And that's the underpinning of the tradition, is I realized I wanted more life in my life.
Now, when did you first have herbs come into your life? this lifestyle? What awakened you to this particular path?
It was an unusual. I had just purchased a farm, and the farm came complete with a flock of sheep. And one of the sheep, we didn't know anything about sheep. We were learning as we went. And one sheep had trouble birthing, so we called a vet out in the middle of the night in the middle of a February rainstorm. And because he didn't answer the phone, I left the directions and called the next vet, thinking they wouldn't get the message till morning. And so 2 vets showed up at my gate that night. And the sheep was worth $10. And this isn't really about money, but it was really about realizing that I needed to find another path if I was going to take care of my livestock. And also I raised dogs at that time. And so I found an herbalist from Europe named Juliette de Berkeley-Levy, and started to look at her work, and her work made so much sense. We had to take into consideration the animal. She's pretty much a veterinary herbalist in her life and practice. And so we just have to take a lot more things into consideration than what we don't want, but what we do want, learning about the different kinds of animals, learning about different plants. So that was what started me on this adventure. And I think of my life as an adventurous life, and a lot of it has to do with plants, planting the parts of plants that would help me understand the world I live in better. I think that was the beginning of it for me, and that was over almost 40 years ago now.
It's really amazing when you get the opportunity to talk with people who are like you, really steeped in this. And as you said, it's a way that they can approach and communicate to you about life. So tell us about the symbiosis and communication. What have you learned as you've been on this path here?
Well, that's a great question, Daniel. What have I learned from herbs and plants in general? One of the things I've learned is patterning, that plants have really helped me understand patterning in life and to start to look for patterns in my life and in the world around me and find sort of where do they begin and where are they going and how do they inform my understanding of life. And I've learned rhythm through the practice of being in tune with plants in the sense of harvesting, planting, growing, bringing them into my life on a daily basis. So right now we're in the midst of our hawthorn harvest, and today is the first day of rain. It's September 2nd, and so all of this helps to inform me the capacity of the plant to be useful in my life. And then I realized with hawthorn, it wasn't just the berry that was the part that would be useful in my life. It gets broader. Hawthorn took me to England 2 times just so I could understand more deeply this plant, in not just in how it helps people with heart strengthening and really bringing spirit into life through embodiment, but also about history. One of my questions was, what did people do when someone got hurt? How did they take care of the everyday parts of life, which you don't get that in school when you go and learn about history. And I was fascinated. I call it tracking through many green doors. One of my friends says it takes 7 lifetimes to become an herbalist, and I'm beginning to believe it because the plants are so complex. And by using one plant at a time in the tending of my health and vitality and the health and vitality of people I work with and animals that I work with, I realized that it's through this simpling that I came to know the complexity of life. So there's a sense of continuity. It isn't separate or fractured. There's a very strong thread that runs through everything. And that continuity gives me a great deal of courage and understanding and capacity to be resilient and adaptive, which with our changing world are qualities that are really useful.
Now, how do herbs communicate with you? or I know that's our topic here, because I could say plants in general, and people might go, well, wait a minute. But it's interesting because I remember years ago as I was reading a bit about botany, and I think it was ethnobotanist Wade Davis, who's best well known for the work The Serpent and the Rainbow and his works around the world, is there was something I was reading that he wrote, and all at once I began thinking, okay, what about the shamans and the witch doctors? How do they know to find the particular things they found in places, let's say, as dense as a rainforest, to know that that particular plant or flower was good to bring in as a healer? And the only thing I can think of, and this was just my thinking process, was that somehow the plant dreamed itself into existence, communicated that way. It's just, but why don't you share with me what that process is like for you?
Well, for me, personally, and I do practice a shamanic tradition, which is really a tradition of embodiment, that the plant moves into me and through me, and then there's a conversation that goes on in the place between the plant and myself. And there's, in that place, we shape each other. So it's different for everybody. It's a personal journey in the shamanic tradition. And one of the things that working with plants on an intimate basis for 40 years, I've come to understand is that people used to be far more embedded in their environment than we are today. We have, people in general have become more and more removed from the environment. So the idea that a plant talks to someone is, it's hard even for me to think about that. There's more of a synergy that works back and forth, and different plants call to me. And so I learn them through practice, and that means going out and being with them in all different seasons, all different times of the year, really kind of learning the depth of their, well, you could say their soul. It's for me now, it's way more about soul than about spirit, even though I don't think those are separate things. I think that we are the conduit between soul or soil and heaven or spirit, that as human beings, we actually have the capacity to connect these two planes of existence and bring wholeness to our world. And so and different plants, each practitioner will have different plants that align with them, and then certain plants are just overarching plants, like umbrella plants, and certain peoples will work with that kind of energy, and other peoples work with other kinds of energy. So there's a lot of different ways that this happens. And my work is really to get people to trust themselves and their learning to tune up their receptors so that they can actually receive the information that's being given constantly to us in our surroundings, in our natural surroundings. But really the same things, patterning, rhythm, rate, continuity, all of those apply to life no matter where you're at. And when you start to, for me, I was touched by plants to do the work, and I'm a slow learner, so I'm really glad that they're great allies. They're there whenever I need them. I can always reach out, and they're always there.
It's also fascinating, and I know that, as our listeners are wondering, well, how can I get started? This sounds interesting, but what's the first step? And, as you said, it could take up to 7 lifetimes, so don't think this is going to be something that's quick and easy, but what would that experience be like for a beginner?
For a beginner, I would encourage them to just to pay attention, go on a walk every day, and if there's one plant, and it doesn't have to be an herb, it can be any plant that catches their attention, to basically apprentice themselves to that plant for a year and a day. So take a walk on a regular pulse through all of the seasons and watch how that plant changes. Maybe it doesn't change. Maybe it changes a lot. Maybe it disappears and comes back again. And really start to to find one thing in life that they can look at in the plant world that they attend to for a year and a day. That's the beginning step, which is why this takes 7 lifetimes. And it can be a plant that you could eat. It could be a plant that's taken internally. I don't know if you remember the book. We're about the same age, but The Stranger in a Strange Land and grokking something. Remember that word, grok?
No, I don't believe I'm familiar with that.
Robert Heinlein, Stranger in a Strange Land, he wrote about grokking, and you actually had to eat something to grok it. And I think that that's really, for me, the shamanic path was bringing plants into my life and then paying attention to them in their world, what goes on in their world, what's their life like, what do they need to exist, how does the energy of that plant change me in my life. And so Hawthorne, I have a long continuity, and we've done a lot of work together. And essentially apprenticing myself to the plant and then learning what's there to be learned. Another one is linden. Linden is another ally that comes up for me in this moment. And that tree, and a lot of trees came later in life. It was small plants in the beginning, but the big trees started showing up as I got older. It seemed that trees really began calling to me. And so the linden flower is used as an herb, and it's an incredible herb for cooling the body. So if there's heat in the body, linden is a nourishing, tonifying, cooling herb, so it can be used, 2-3 times a week with a healing infusion where you take 1 ounce of the dried flowers and then put them boiling water over it, leave it for 8 hours, and then drink it. I'm drinking it right now, actually. And linden is an amazing tree. When I went to England, it's a highly esteemed tree in Europe, and there's native lindens to the North American continent, and it's called basswood. So realizing I was outside of the church in England, and there were a linden alley, which is they planted lindens beside the walk going up to the church, and they had been there so long. There were gravestones in the root mass of this one linden tree from 1624, and on the back side of that tree, when I went around the tree was totally hollow. It was just living on the vitality that went up and down the phloem in the bark, just under the bark. And that tree was, close to, 400 years old.
Wow.
And so I realized there's this, trees can watch what's going on for a really long time. And so by having allies with trees, it deepened my experience of life on this planet. And little things that irritate on the surface, they begin to reduce as I have this deepening part of my life developing. And so I can stay more focused on the work I need to do, and the irritation and inflammation that comes with it on the little things on the surface. I think linden is an incredible ally for people who want to deepen their experience in their life, and it's just a calming, helps sleep. It's a wonderful herb, and it's a really large tree. The flowers, when they're blooming, are literally covered with honeybees. You can hear the whole tree starts to buzz. So you see this interface with plants and people. What I started to realize is that plants, people, and place is what is the birth and the mother of culture.
I was just thinking as you were saying that one, I guess, exercise that a person can do is being out in their front yard and enjoying the dandelions. Get to know what a dandelion is.
Yeah, that's great.
And it's pretty amazing how most people look at the dandelion and they think, this is this weed that's encroaching on my yard, literally in armies, but they don't realize is the value that the dandelion actually has. Now, one of those I was told about was there's a lady that's actually up in Washington, and she has one of those community sustainable farms, I guess, where people can go and stay, and as a result, you get food and shelter for the time that you're there. But it's mainly for students who are learning to farm. And, you know, you can, of course, stay there, but then you also trade work. But the work is also related to what you want to learn when it comes to farming. And she was talking about the dandelion, and she says, one thing people that don't understand the dandelion is it has a very deep root, and it's also showing that apparently your soil is lacking calcium. So that's what it's actually doing, is replacing that. And, you know, that's one of those things when you hear it, you go, ring, and you start seeing something differently. But why don't you go ahead from your perspective of the wise woman and tell us about the dandelion? This is something everybody sees and encounters.
Oh, it is. It's so ubiquitous. Dandelion's a great place to start because everybody can recognize them. And remember that when you're looking at a plant that you think is a dandelion, to be sure it's the dandelion that we're speaking of and not a hairy cat's ear, you want to look at the stem. And so the stem, there's one stem per flower. And the look-alike hairy cat's ears, there'll be one stem with multiple flowers. The stem branches, and there's lots of little yellow flowers. So the true dandelion, Taraxacum officinalis, is the plant that has that deep root, and especially from a farming perspective, because I've farmed a goodly part of my life and come from a family of farming people, and so the dandelion is a plant that does drive a deep root. And it's what I call a green plow, because when the plant actually grows down into the soil at a good depth, it is bringing nutrients to the surface. And truthfully, calcium is one of the most plentiful minerals on the Earth's surface, but it isn't always easy to take it up for plants. So the dandelion, by penetrating the earth, it opens the earth, more water and air gets into the earth, so it's like a plow. It opens and gets air and water into the earth. It brings minerals up from the deep, and then it goes summer dormant. So a lot of them actually just stop blooming in the middle of summer, and the top dies down right where it's at. So it puts those minerals that it's been bringing up from the deep part of the soil to the surface. And nothing has to get turned over. It just happens by the plant being there. So those deep-rooted plants are really helpful in people's health because they bring rich, dandelion root is a high calcium, it's high in calcium, so when you use it as a healing infusion, 1 ounce to 1 quart of boiling water steeped 8 hours, you actually can access that calcium and many of the other minerals that are rich in dandelion because water is the universal solvent. It allows the nutrients to dissolve into a form that the body can instantly and easily uptake. I could go on for 2 days about dandelion, or because they everything that got chastised as weeds were actually plants that helped the soil to rejuvenate itself and to maintain a healthy nature. So all those deep-rooted herbs that people spray and try to get rid of are really the plants we need. And what they're finding now is that those are plants that the animals eat, and it helps to nourish and bring vitality to everything that touches them.
Yeah, it's just such a fascinating subject, and like you said, there's so much that can be talked about when it comes to this, but hopefully we've given people the tip of the iceberg. And, you know, I just remember as I started learning about dandelions, they were saying one of the things that dandelions are also good for is cleansing the liver, you know. Mm-hmm. I was like, really? You know, this is this thing right out here in the front yard. I mean, I got them all over the place, you know, big ones, little ones, that sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. There's this ubiquitous plant everywhere that people have been taught to not like. It's totally a learned behavior. And really, by using the root of the dandelion, you will nourish the liver and actually increase the vitality of that plant because the liver is a lot like the soil. It really does a lot of work in the body for processing and taking out different nutrients. It's the hormone regulator in the body. So here we have a weed and a liver. And, you know, people don't know much about dandelions, but they know even less about their liver. So that's what I find to be so fascinating about plants, why it's kept me totally interested for over 4 decades, is because I've learned so much about my own body and my own life and my own place in the world.
Yeah, I was going to say, too, it was funny because a former neighbor of mine, he had this, you know, big, I guess call it the nice backyard, lush green grass. You didn't see a single weed in sight. And I looked at that after understanding what I had in my backyard, you know, which was a fairly large backyard with lots of dandelions, you know, is that his yard started looking dead to me.
Uh-huh.
You know, and why I say that is true is because and there was a lot of sunshine that got back in my backyard, so usually if it was really green, it's because water, you know, there was a lot of rain or whatever the case is, and summer was going away. But what was fun about that when you say alive is that as the dandelion would have the flower, well, then you'd start seeing bees come around. And I could sit on a porch all day long and watch bees and flowers. It's just such a wonderful thing to watch, really, the intimate, loving relationship they have. And so you got to imagine, you know, that as this bee is pollinating, literally, these dandelions, and you're letting them live, what they're going to bring back to you, because they they instinctively or intuitively know, hey, this guy thinks we're pretty groovy, and you just start seeing different things, and it's just really a fascinating thing, like you said, to get to know.
That's it, because you've created habitat for a more diverse we do the same thing at our house. We really love to sit and watch to see who comes to visit. And all the different wild things, all the different birds that come, and having diverse plantings in your garden. My brother says, don't use the word yard, that's where you park trucks. So help to say garden. So having diversity in height, having plants of different heights, having plants that go into the soil at different depths, really invites a larger population of animals and insects. So your place, actually, they probably have you marked. They send all their friends over, and they say, you know, the eating's really good over there, and especially with honeybees, because they actually are known to tell each other where the good food is.
Right.
And so you create this symbiosis, and if you get involved with the eating of the dandelion, the beautiful thing is because it is so deep-rooted, it rarely can you get rid of them. I consider it to be the easiest plant I've ever grown.
That's a fact.
Because
and the more you appreciate them, the easier and the more of them grow.
Totally.
And, you know, it's interesting, you know, because I live here in Portland, Oregon. We have a lot of farmers markets. I mean, our city, you know, and I'm sure Washington is the same way, but that you're seeing more of this urban farmer gardener thing where you're finding more sustainable and organic produce, which when you go to a farmer's market is fairly inexpensive compared to going to the supermarket for the same thing. And one thing I did notice at one of the farmers markets was how often you could find varieties of dandelions for sale, that they were actually selling them in bulk. And I'm like, that was something that I think 10 years ago, or maybe even 5 years ago, well, maybe 5 years ago, but 10 years ago, I don't think you would have seen something like that. So it's like there seems to be a shift. And, you know, it seems to me when you shift that way, you know, that you really connect. I mean, without plants, we would all die. It's just that simple. You know, we live in a symbiosis that way. And anybody who just looks at basic science would know this is true. But that as a result, they thrive, you begin to thrive, and then you begin to understand the symbiosis a lot better, I think.
You've got it. That's exactly how it works. It's that conversation that's going on between things that is what shapes each participant in the conversation. And so the conversations are getting richer and deeper and more diverse in our cities. And I think a lot of it has to do with more and more food being grown in people's backyards and in urban farming situations. It's like we just took this idea and ran with it as human beings. But I really have this theory that, and especially weeds and bacteria, because fermented food has taken off just as fast. And when I realized that we as humans are the habitat for a tremendous amount of bacteria, that perhaps they are actually getting us to do their work. But they need us to create the fermented food so that we can keep them active and alive and diverse in our own digestive tract. And now the digestion and the brain are science is starting to realize there's a great conversation going on between the brain and the digestive tract. And so this diversity is really bringing about a lot of amazing conversations in our neighborhoods and at our farmers markets. And, there's a lot of loud noises going on in the world today. And yet this other conversation is the oldest conversation that's been going on the planet since the beginning of time. And it's really about when we start tuning into it and we start grokking the way it works, just like you described it, then we really become more at home in our place. We relax, we become more vital and healthy, and people start to get on board with the idea that we're not observers but participants in the dreaming of the world that we live in.
I was also thinking some years back we did a series of interviews on a particular book that actually, I think, has 8 volumes. But the first one is titled Anastasia. And that's exactly what they talk about there, about how we're in communication. There was something interesting that I had read because they were talking about how in Russia, apparently, they just would give you a house, there's a plot of land, and your job is to work that plot of land. You grow all the food you'll ever need for yourself, but then you grow so much there's enough for a lot of other people as well. Mm-hmm. And one of the practices they talked about in this book was, to me, pretty fascinating. They said what you want to do nightly is you get yourself a bowl of water, and basically you wash your feet over the bowl of water. You're using that water to wash your feet. You don't use any soap. You just, use a towel or maybe just your hands. Mm-hmm. And you allow that water to go back into the bowl, and then once you're finished, then you go out to the garden and you distribute that water to the plants. And apparently what happens is, and when you think about it, I don't see why this would be untrue or silly or seemingly weird, but then the plant's or let's say biochemistry, if you will, begins to pick up the chemistry of what you just put to them, which is your washed feet. And they begin to biochemically adjust themselves. So therefore, when you think about it, you get to a point where a plant is actually helping you prevent disease because it knows exactly how it needs to adjust so that when you take it in, it's ready to do that very thing. And I thought, as crazy as that may seem to people, I thought, that just makes so much sense. And I'll tell you, like I've got another interesting story, a spider plant. Most people, who have had a plant have had at least a spider plant once in their life.
Yeah.
Now, I had one when I was living in my last place about 6 or 7 years ago, and it was a small plant that I had actually clipped off of the spider off of a plant that my dad had at his company, which he no longer is in that building or any of that, but I clipped it off of there, so this was quite a few years ago, about 10, 12 years ago. And I got to a point where I just stopped really, now this will probably sound more, but there was a period of my life where I just sort of felt like I stopped caring. I just kind of let myself go. Well, I had a lot of plants, and they all basically decided, well, if that's how you feel about it, well, we feel the same way, and so they started dying off one by one. Well, I got to the point where I was at this little spider plant, and I'd say there was 3 total leaves that were left. They probably were about, the longest one was maybe 3 inches at best. It was in this little bitty pot, and they were all 3 draped over the side of this little tiny pot. And I'd say the average leaf width was probably maybe a quarter to almost a half an inch at best. And they were yellow. And this was this way for almost a year. I didn't really bother to water this plant. I didn't, like I said, there was just this period of my life I just kind of felt like letting go, I guess. And then finally, as I'm looking at this, this is what I thought. I said, I'm no longer going to neglect you anymore. We're going to get you taken care of. I've got a plant today that just keeps spitting off spiders all over the place. I have to give them away to people. This was the same plant that should have been dead. It literally was lifeless. The leaves were a pale yellow of all things. The spider plants are green. And this thing is just thriving like crazy. It's just, and I have hardly had to do anything but just water it once in a while.
Yeah.
But see, so there's that intention we're talking about.
Really picking up on your, how you were feeling. And when you changed how you felt, you were able to tend to the plant, and it was responding.
And I think the lesson, too, to learn from all of that would be the idea of resilience, because this, to me, was one of the most resilient things I had seen. I was just amazed.
Yeah. Yep. And that's one reason why we really love the weeds. And grandmas all over the world, one of their afternoon activities is to go out and harvest up all the weeds and then cook them up for dinner. It's a tradition in Greece, which is horta, served at dinner. It's a mixed greens. In Asia, the women do it. And so that's why I say this is the oldest tradition of healing on the planet, because that's what people, there was a reciprocity. The women went out and gathered the greens, and with a lot of green things, the more you harvest them, the more they grow.
It seems that way, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. With dandelions, we've seen that. And plants really do pick up on your state of being. I went through the same kind of thing that you are talking about, where it was didn't really care about anything, couldn't really decide I liked anything, nothing was tickling my fancy anymore. Let's just say I wasn't getting off on life. And I have a goat, and her name's Joy, and so there was probably a year or two where I danced with Joy twice a day. And had I not had something to take care of, I might have totally lost myself. So care and tending is a really important part of this tradition, that we care and tend what's going on around us, and that in the doing of that, we are also enriched in our life. And whether it's your small garden out back or whatever it is, what we put our attention to is what seems to do the best. And really knowing also that life takes us through those places where you might call it the doldrums, and having allies that can actually sing your song back to you. And I think that's one of the places where, for me, shamanic herbalism has been incredible, is when the plants could help me remember who I am through our long time conversation. That was super. That it's way outside of treating something that's wrong with me. It was much more in alignment with bringing me back into the family of life itself.
In other words, remembering what is good about you.
Yeah, and actually remembering all of me, not just what's good about me, but that I'm a really diverse and rich human being. And in the long run, in the long picture of things, Daniel, it's sort of meaningless. So there's an existential part of our lives at this point in the world today, because we've reached this global place, that we actually have to come to grips with that in some ways. Some people do. I don't think other people necessarily have this resonance that they need to work with. But some people really do need to come to grips with the fact that our lives are pretty much meaningless. And really the only thing that you can say is then the only meaning in life is what we bring to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that plants taught me. They don't come to get anything. They only come to give. And it's not about getting or giving. It's just that they just come and be who they are. And that's the part I think is the most wonderful thing I've learned from plants, is that they can't be anything except what they are, and neither can we.
Ah, Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Isn't it? Like each and every one of us is a seed,
Mm-hmm.
and our growing and our fruition and our, depending on what, like I see people as plants, so depending on what kind of plant you are, some people are evergreens. They're just there all the time, and they're sturdy, and they're upright. Other people are, they come in the summer, and they go away in the winter, and then they show up again in the summer, and it's just realizing that there isn't any rightness or wrongness in it. There's just this amazing diversity and a dance that just keeps going on. And I'm kind of fond of the dance.
It sure is fun watching bees do that very dance. You think to yourself, well, there's something to envy there. They're in the sunshine, they're cuddling with that flower, and it's just, it's a wonderful thing to watch. And like you said, we need to reconnect with that a lot more and really slow life down. With technology, the way it's overrunning people, I just see constantly how it's almost like people are now born with these cell phones in their hands, and they're just disconnected. Or, you'll see a couple at dinner and they're both on the phone texting, and you're thinking to yourself, does anybody ever talk to each other anymore? I mean, or have they just forgotten how to do this?
These are all fascinating things, aren't they?
Now, tell us. Let's talk about the Pacific Women's Herbal Conference. What's this all about?
Oh, in the fall, in September, up here in Washington, a handful of women and I put on what we call the Pacific Women's Herbal Conference, and it really is a chance for women to come together. It's at a kids camp actually, and so it's rustic. It's actually only 35 miles from Seattle. But it's just far enough out that we can't actually use our cell phones. And so we get 4 days in one another's company, and we do on-purpose sit-down dinners of local food so that people really get a chance to remember what it's like to have a conversation. And so we have incredible speakers come that are from the local Northwest area, sometimes from Portland and all up and down Washington, and we're reaching out. We'll probably have people from Montana next year teaching, and they bring really beautiful nuggets that they've worked on in their lives and in the Wise Woman tradition, and everyone sort of gravitates to what they love to do the most. And so we have a lot. We have over 40 workshops this coming up conference, and 20 different presenters that come with a lot of different voices, and that's what our theme this year is, raising our voices and deepening our connection. Like, how do we learn to speak with our natural voice, and what is it that we are connecting to in our journey here on the planet? And so, connecting with, I think I would say. But that's what we're doing, and we do it every September, third week in September. We like to do it late in the fall, so we get all the wonderful local food that's just got all of summer tucked inside itself, and then we get together and we make meals together, and we share wisdom together, and we sing and dance and basically have a really good time. And then everyone goes home and has winter.
It's always a pleasure to have you here on the program, especially sharing the wisdom of what people can learn about reconnecting. It's not about, this plant's full of these kind of ingredients and all these special, minerals and so forth and so on, and getting back to what it is itself as a whole. And I just have one question for you, and that is it true that daisies do tell?
Who you're in love with?
No, I'm just wondering, do daisies really tell?
Do daisies tell what?
Tattletale. Do they really?
Oh.
The old maxim, daisies tell. Be careful what you do in front of a daisy because it'll tattletale on you.
I heard that. That's a new one for me. But that sounds like an old wives' tale.
Well, it's interesting because it just came to mind when Twilight Zone resurrected. Excuse me. There was an episode where a guy was actually learning through biomechanics and bioelectricity to see how he can communicate with plants. And so he's got this little greenhouse going on and so forth, and it was funny because the scene I caught, and it was just that one scene was enough to make me realize what the whole story was. So apparently his wife came home. She puts on the earphones for a little bit, and she's standing in front of daisies. The next thing you know, she goes up, she gets herself a little hand pistol and shoots her husband. So I surmise the fact that he was having an affair. The daisies were watching this, and they decided to tell her that that's what was going on.
But you see, that's totally a technological tale.
Mm-hmm.
Because plants and animals are amazingly good at mixing it up. They would never shoot somebody for such a thing.
Right.
But anyway, it's true. It's like getting out and watching nature and seeing how she adapts and changes to the changes going on in our world, the resiliency. I'm always saying go for the plants that have the most resilience, which usually turns out to be the weeds. They've learned compromised environments, and they have a lot of integrity and a lot of vitality. And so really not weeding our fields and gardens, but eating them is important to getting that deeper understanding. And then you and the daisies will start telling the same story.
Very good. Eagle Song, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. For our listeners, if there's a website they can visit and discover more about this herbal conference and everything else that you're about, where can they go?
They could go to the Pacific Women's Herbal Conference.com, and we actually have a $50 coupon code that they can get a reduction in the registration at this time. So Pacific Women's Herbal Conference.com. We'd love to have people come, see what we're doing, and take part in a really different kind of gathering around plants.
Absolutely. Eagle Song, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. I'm going to go out and enjoy my weeds now for a while.
All right. Eat your weeds, Daniel.
Thanks again for being on the program.
You bet. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Yeah, sit out there in your front yard or backyard, wherever you may, and just enjoy the weed for itself, not as an enemy, but as a wonderful ally. You'll discover what I'm talking about as you allow this to happen. You can also discover more by visiting us at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. We encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-news updates. That way you can stay updated on what's going on in Beyond 50 and what's coming up on upcoming shows. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Beyond 50 Radio as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.